Rock and roll.
2020 now. All right.
Greetings. I'm very appreciative for your coming. First, let me get a few housekeeping things out of the way. Because we're live streaming this evening's program, we'd ask that you refrain from using the internet, and that'll ensure that we have the bandwidth that we need. And if you need to take a break at any point, the restrooms are right down that hall. I'm Lee Rasch. I'm with Leader Ethics, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this program this evening. Our sponsors on this program, this is really led by the effort brought forward by Keep Our Republic, and the organization in Wisconsin is called Keep Our Republic Wisconsin. And it's in collaboration with Leader Ethics and a media consortium that we're a partner with in La Crosse called Community. Well, we believe this is an important meeting. Consider this. The most recent Marquette University poll shows that 1 out of every 3 Wisconsin citizens still has doubts about the outcome of the 2020 election. Consider this, that in the United States, there are about 10,000 election clerks and election workers. In Wisconsin, because of the makeup with the various municipalities and our counties, we have nearly 2,000. So now think about that. If there are 10,000 nationally, 1 in 5 of the election employees, the election clerks in the country are here in Wisconsin. And consider that the 2024 election is a high-profile election, and Wisconsin is considered one of the key battleground states, and that the dynamics at the national and the state level are in uncharted territory. So that's why it's so important to bring together information and share information about how our election process works, what are the safeguards that we have in place to try to ensure that we have integrity in the election, and you get an understanding of the key role that the staff and volunteers play to ensure that the elections are held fairly and accurately in every community. Moderating today's program is Kathy Bernier, and I can't think of anyone who would be better prepared for the role that she's in, and that is Director of Keep Our Republic Wisconsin. Kathy is a former state senator, a former state representative, and a former elections clerk. And she will be moderating today's program. She'll do the introductions, and we are condensing a lot of information into a tight time frame, but we will have adequate time for your questions, and respectfully, we hope that you'll share those with us this evening. And now, I'll introduce Kathy Bernier.
Thank you. Oh, you don't need to applaud. I'm good. It's a pleasure to be here. We've got an action-packed evening for you. It takes a long while to get through the electoral process in 2 hours. So we're going to have some rules. We'll take questions, but we're only going to take questions at certain points. After, it'll say up there, questions, so then that'll give you an opportunity to ask your questions and get them answered. And so we're going to try to move along as quickly as possible. To Keep Our Republic is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization or bipartisan. So one of the first things that I was tasked to do when approached by Keep Our Republic is to put together an advisory council. Lee Rasch is one of those people on the Wisconsin Advisory Council. We have a dozen people. You can look it up on keepourrepublic.org. And also Tommy Thompson and Barbara Lawton and a few others on the Democrat side as well. But also we have Mike Hipsch, who is on my advisory council, and we have very interesting conversations about the electoral process. And I asked him to speak, to talk to you about how Keep Our Republic is nonpartisan, is bipartisan, and we're not just focusing on center-right voters. There are center-left that need to consider voter fraud, voter suppression, misinformation, and disinformation that has occurred most recently in 2016. So I want to introduce to you Mike Hipsch. He is a former Assembly Speaker as well as a representative from this area for 16 years. He also was the secretary of the Department of Administration in the Walker administration. When I came in, he left, so I don't know what that means for sure. But it's been a pleasure working with Mike Hipsch, and give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I knew that we were finding a good hand, so I could leave. That's why I was able to go. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I know that this is a very important issue to many of you, and I will tell Lee, I'm one of those three. I'm one of those that's skeptical about 2020. But any student of history is probably skeptical about almost every election. I still don't think Kennedy won Illinois in 1960. But you know what? I'm not going to go back and undo that election. Actually, I know the last election, presidential election, that was uncontroversial. It was Washington's second term. After that, if you go back and look, it's been knocked down, drag out ever since. And that's the way it is here in America. And it's one of the things that makes us strong. It's one of the things that makes us great, is the ability to have that discussion and have that argument. But I will tell you that at the end of an election, you should be disappointed, angry, arguing, whatever, about the fact that your candidate didn't win. You should not be disappointed, arguing, angry about the fact that you don't know if the election was run correctly, or if it was stolen, or if there were anomalies that caused concerns. That's what we're here to do. We're here to try to not only educate, but also hear from people as to what those concerns are. I've got many. I mean, the fact is that I watched in 2016. I looked at and watched that election and said, I wonder if that was stolen. I didn't know. As Kathy said, I'm as Republican as they come. I mean, I don't really approach many things nonpartisan. I'm partisan. I'm just going to lay it right out there. But I wanted to see whether or not there were some things that were going on in 2016 as well. And certainly the Congress spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort to determine whether there was Russian collusion, if there was some sort of things that were going on. And in the end, thankfully, we discovered that there really wasn't, that it was all pretty much on the up and up. Well, as much as our elections are these days. And don't get me wrong, there are people who want to do nefarious things in our elections. But for the most part, our system doesn't allow it. You'll learn more about that tonight. You'll find out how there are safeguards in place, how there are things that will happen that are not allowed to happen that we think are in fact going on. And it just isn't. But you need to keep an open mind. You're going to hear some things tonight you're not going to like. I hope I say some of them, frankly. But the fact is that we need to take a close look at how our elections are going forward. And by keeping that open mind, and this is what really drove me to this organization, because Lee Rosh invited me to a meeting back in February, as you remember. And we were talking about how we needed to get past the 2020 election, all those type of things. And I raised my hand and I said, in 2016 I watched as we explored everything there was to explore about the 2016 election. We looked to determine whether or not there was anything wrong or right. But the minute that I suggested that maybe something wasn't done exactly right in 2020, I was part of a big lie. That was not going to fly. And as I said, and I told you this that day, if you think there's a group of us, the group of the intelligentsia, that's simply going to speak to everybody else and say that everything's fine and you have nothing to worry about, the elections are great, that's not going to fly either. We want to hear everything you have to be concerned about. I'll bring up some of those. We will continue to have this discussion, but the minute that you say, this election is rigged, I'm walking away, that's when we no longer keep our republic. And that concerns me more than anything. When people begin to think that their vote doesn't count, that they're not going to matter because somewhere else somebody is going to game the system in a way that they're not going to count, that's when our republic collapses. That's why I'm involved with this, because that cannot be allowed to happen. I hope all of you have come here with that same type of commitment, that we're going to make sure that our republic is going to continue to work, that there are concerns and there are issues that we need to deal with. We're not going to undo the 2020 election. I hope you're not here thinking that's the case. But we better figure out what we think went wrong there to make sure it doesn't happen in 2024. And I assure you, we'll have to do it again in 2028 for whatever we think didn't go right next November. But that's what we're all here about. That's what we're here to committed to. And I thank you for your time tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. I would like to recognize Anthony Trombi. He is the Keep Our Republic media advisor who has been contacting all of our media as we have been moving along in the state. We've been to several different communities already So he helps me do that. And I would like to recognize Ari Middleman, who is the executive director for Keep Our Republic, who came here to meet all of you Wisconsinites from Maryland. So welcome, Ari. And next, I'll have these fine election experts introduce themselves. But first, I want to thank you all. There hasn't been a county clerk or a municipal clerk when I've called and asked, can you help me present the facts about how elections are run and show people where the checks and balances are. With that said, there were some things that occurred, as Mike and I have talked about, as GPS and I have talked about. There are some things that occurred under COVID that shouldn't have occurred. And so I understand that and I recognize that, but moving forward, we want you to all know where all of the safeguards are so that when you hear disinformation or misinformation, you will know the facts about how that works, how the electronic systems work, and that sort of thing. And these folks have been great to work with, and I appreciate each and every one of them for helping tonight. And I would like you to introduce yourself, and then we'll move on to the program.
Good evening. I'm Megan Wolf. I'm the administrator of the State of Wisconsin Elections Commission, and I'm also the State of Wisconsin's chief election official, and in my position, I'm required by law to be nonpartisan.
I'm Jenny Dinkmeyer. I'm the county clerk. I have been administering elections for over 12 years in La Crosse County.
My name is Nikki Elson. I'm La Crosse City Clerk. I have worked in the city clerk's office for just under 25 years. I'm happy to be here to provide some insight on our local election processes, and I'm always just a phone call away if you have a question.
And I'm Kyle Weber. I'm the Wisconsin Account Manager for ES&S, which is the election equipment provider here in La Crosse County.
Okay, tonight our mission is to talk to you about pre-election, what everything, all the things that are done to prepare for an election, where all the safeguards are in regard to what is done prior to an election. I know Lisa Tullifson, Rock County Clerk, calls Election Day Christmas. I didn't see it that way. But preparing for Christmas and then having Christmas, she's a little kooky. But Election Day, leading up to that, it just doesn't happen. When you go in and vote, you sometimes think it just, oh, well, I'm just here to vote. I cast my ballot and I leave. There's a lot more to it than that, and that is what we're going to explain to you. And then we'll talk about post-election, certifying results, auditing those results, and there's 3 certifications that go on in an election. That is the certification at the local level, the county level, and the state level. So it's a coordinated effort. Obviously, we just expressed the municipalities, the counties, and the state work together to prepare for an elections. We also contract with election providers, sometimes ballot printers. Some is done at the local level, and we'll talk about that. Ginny will talk about whether she does her own programming for the ballots or not. But we also, Kyle Weber from Election System and Software, we have other vendors, and we'll talk about how they get certified, that county clerks and municipal clerks can work with those vendors, and that is how we all pull the whole election together. So first on pre-election, we will defer to the state.
Thank you so much. So at the state level, prior to an election, so first of all, at the state level, we run elections a little differently in the state of Wisconsin than a lot of other states. We have a bipartisan commission. So we have 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. They're appointed by legislative leadership. They're the ones that make decisions about how elections are administered in Wisconsin. I, as the administrator, I don't have a vote on the commission. I implement their directives. And so before an election, there's a lot of them meeting. Just tonight at 5:30, actually, the commission had a meeting where they met to discuss some administrative rules. So they're always meeting. It's always a public process. There's also a number of other duties and responsibilities we have at the state. One is ballot templates. So as you'll hear, the clerks are the ones that actually produce the ballots that are sent to their voters, but we do produce templates that they can utilize for the different types of systems that are available. We also certify candidates that are state level candidates. So if there's somebody running for a federal office or a state legislative office, statewide office, or even some of our judicial seats, they all file with the Wisconsin Elections Commission. So those nomination papers come to our office and we review those. The 6-member commission then meets and decides who should get on the ballot. So that's a huge task. The deadline, well, I shouldn't say deadline, the first day of circulating nomination papers for next year's election is actually December 1st. So right around the corner, next year's election cycle really does kick off. We also provide training and guidance to local election officials. Wisconsin has more local election officials than any other state in the country. So most other states, they might have 50, maybe 100 local election officials at the county level. States like Arizona, they have 15 local election officials in their county. Does anybody know how many local election officials we have in the state of Wisconsin? Any guesses? Almost 2,000. We have 1,850 municipal clerks, and we have 72 county clerks. And so our job is to provide training, resources, guidance, technology that those clerks utilize. We also maintain the statewide voter registration system. So a lot of times I think people think at the state, we register voters or we issue absentee ballots. We do not. You're going to hear from your clerks about how that happens at the local level. We maintain the statewide voter registration database, which is a technological system. The data in it, though, is all data entered by your local election official. So we don't have the ability to register a voter, to change a voter's status, to issue an absentee ballot. That's not something that happens at the state level. It happens at the local level. We also certify voting equipment, and we'll talk more about voting equipment and how it first gets certified at the federal level. And then the state has protocols where we go out and test a new system, and we bring that information then from the public test. We've had 4 systems that were tested just this fall and summer. And then once that test is complete, we bring that information to the 6-member commission. In a public meeting, they decide, they demonstrate the equipment, and they decide whether or not it can be used here in the state of Wisconsin. Does it meet our legal standards in the state of Wisconsin? And then we're also an information source. You know, we're here to support local election officials, but we're also here to provide information to the public about how elections work. And so we really do try to take questions in from the public and research them and then provide information that local election officials, voter groups, and others can use to educate people about the voting process. So those are some of our main roles at the state level.
Thank you, Megan. And now I'm going to jump in. Being the moderator, I get to do that. Just for clarification on a few things. So during 2016, with the Russian collusion accusations and the Russian hacking accusations, as you know, our Congress gave us money to provide more secure systems. So was the voter registration or the voter system in the state of Wisconsin hacked?
No, the system in the state of Wisconsin was not breached in any way.
Okay. And all of the safeguards and the double authentication that we have and the various authentication, if it were hacked, would you be able to tell?
Absolutely. So the state of Wisconsin, you know, with our statewide database, which we will get into a little bit later, we secure that. So we provide the policies, parameters for security that then the local clerks access that. And so we're able to see immediately if something is sort of off, if our baseline in terms of, you know, the activity in the system, who's accessing it is off, we'd be able to see that and investigate that. Another thing I think is really important is all that data that your clerk puts into the statewide system, that's available to the public. And groups, campaigns, they buy that data constantly. They'll buy thousands and thousands of sets of that data, and they can do their own analysis and look at exactly what's happening in the voter registration system. And so that's something that's happening every single day. And in addition to our checks, that would be another check in another place where you would see if there was unusual activity.
Okay, and we'll talk about safeguards in the voter, My Vote system in a little bit later. Okay. County level.
Thank you, Kathy. So my role is the chief election official of La Crosse County. I oversee the elections at the county level. As Kathy talked about just a little bit ago, we do code elections in-house here at La Crosse County. We're unique that way, as there's not a lot of counties that do that. For me, it's more efficient, it's cost-effective, and it's more timely to get our ballots to the clerks who have deadlines to get those absentee ballots out to the voters that have a request on file. Many times we're waiting for the state to certify the candidates. Sometimes there are challenges whether ballot or candidates should be on the ballot. Sometimes there's lawsuits. So any delay in getting those names to us delays us getting the ballot. So coding in-house allows me to get the coding done ahead of time, have the ballots ready to go. We have them tested, we know they're reading properly, so all we're waiting for are the final names. We can plug in those names as soon as we have them. Within a couple hours, the ballots are sent to our printer to start getting those ballots back to us. It's more secure. The media sticks never leave the locked vault in my office unless we're pulling them out for testing or they're being sent to the municipal clerks. They're not being sent back and forth between us and election vendors who are doing the coding. And we have security logs. Anytime that media stick leaves my vault, we log in why it was pulled out, who took it out, and the reason for it. So we're constantly tracking the movements of ballots and media sticks so we know where they are at all times. After the filing deadline, that's when the clerks send information to my office, the contests they're going to have, the candidates that are going to be on there, and that's when I create the ballot styles and I start to program the ADA compliant machine. Here in La Crosse County, the ADA compliant machine is the Express Vote. If you live in the town of Shelby, I'm sure you're very familiar with the Express Vote. It's a nifty little machine. It's not necessarily for just people who are ADA that need it. I actually use the Express Vote when I go to vote because I think it's just a really neat machine and it makes sure that you're voting your ballot properly. There's many municipalities, even counties, that use the Express Vote for in-person voting because once you vote that ballot, there's not a chance for you to fix it at the polls on election day. So if you're using the Express Vote, it's going to make sure you're voting that ballot properly and that you're not overvoting, undervoting, or anything like that. So we're very happy to have those machines. The number of ballot styles just depends on the election. We actually have the spring elections pretty much coded. We're ready to go. We're just waiting for the date to come around now. But we'll have about 90 different ballot styles for La Crosse County for the April 24 election. I also provide training to the election officials and municipal clerks. Not all county clerks do that. I often get asked why. And it's the paperwork. I want them to understand why they're filling out the paperwork and what's needed, not just me telling them I need this filled out. You're going to better understand what you're doing if I can explain to you why we need that information. It also helps during the recount process. If we're pulling out paperwork from any municipality, we know how that paperwork is filled out. We're not spending time trying to go through the paperwork and figure out what was here and what was here and what was meant here. We know it's all filled out the same, so we can just run right through all the municipalities for recounts. And it's also to make sure every voter has the same experience no matter what polling place you walk into on election day. The polling places may be set up slightly different, but the experience you have, what you're required to do, what you're required to provide in order to get that ballot should be the same at every polling place in La Crosse County. Also during this time, we're supporting the municipal and school district clerks because we have to remember there's also school district clerks as they prepare for election day, helping them out with what they need. We're posting election notices. There's the type V voter instructions that we get to the polling places. In the paper, we're putting the sample ballot, the list of contests, where your polling locations are. We're not necessarily required to do that, but I think it's beneficial to have one polling place location printed in the paper, so there's one location you can go to find all your information. We also have all that information posted on our website. And we do the testing. We create test decks in-house. That's making sure the machines are reading the ballots properly and they're tallying the votes correctly. We also test the ADA compliant machine, making sure whatever contest you choose, that's what's actually counted by the machine. All the media sticks are tested before they leave my office, so we know that everything is functioning properly and that the clerks are ready to go. And the clerks also complete a pre-test and a public test. The pre-test is the clerk pulling out the machines, making sure they're booting up, making sure the ballots are reading properly, and they modem that pre-test into my office to make sure the modems and the software within my office are accepting those results. And then they do the public test, which is notice to the public, and that's where they're putting that identified test deck through and making sure it's counting exactly how it matches up with the spreadsheet so the machine is counting properly. And then my staff also provides WisVote services to some of the smaller municipalities that don't necessarily have the security, the technology, or the means to do it. So what a municipal clerk does for WisVote, my office does that for about 7 different municipalities in La Crosse County.
Thank you. I know as Chippewa County Clerk, and I believe they still do, we provide for 27 different municipalities in Chippewa County through the WisVote system, which does provide some continuity in that as well. So I'd like to recognize, I invited a lot of legislators, and we have one who came. And a representative, former colleague of mine, Representative Jill Billings. So thank you for being here. Yes. Okay, we have absentee voting that is handled through our city, towns, and villages. With that, Nikki?
So as the city clerk, I am responsible for administering elections at our local level here in the city of La Crosse. One of our biggest pre-election activities is absentee voting. In Wisconsin, electors are allowed to vote an absentee either by mail or in person. By mail, municipal clerks start mailing ballots to electors with a valid request on file 21 days before an election or 47 days before an election with federal contests. Now, when I say a request on file, that means a paper request. Requests for absentee ballots are not allowed verbally. The elector's information and eligibility is then checked before a ballot is mailed. Absentee ballots are logged in WisVote both when they're sent and when they're returned, ensuring that there is only one ballot per voter. In-person absentee voting is the other option. That is allowed during a 14-day period before each election at designated locations. On the 4th Tuesday preceding each election, municipal clerks are required to publish a notice in the paper designating their locations, the dates, the hours, and you can't deviate from those posted locations, times, or hours. When absentee ballots are returned to the city clerk's office, staff reviews those envelopes for sufficiency. If there's any insufficiencies with those absentee certificate envelopes, we do make every attempt we can to contact the voters, make them aware of the insufficiency, and give them their options, if there are any, in getting that corrected before Election Day. Returned voted absentee ballots remain sealed in their certificate envelope. They are securely stored in the municipal clerk's office until they are transported to the respective polling place on Election Day. And it's always important, I think, to remember that valid absentee ballots are always counted, whether there's the races are tight or there's a landslide. I know there's, thoughts somewhere that absentee ballots are only counted when there's tight races, and that's simply not true. Valid absentees are always sent to the polling places and they're always counted. Another pre-election activity for us is we test, as Jenny kind of mentioned a bit ago. The municipal clerks are responsible for testing the ballots and the equipment prior to every election. By state law, we can do this no sooner than 10 days before each election, And within 48 hours of testing, we have to publish notice to the public so that they are aware. It is a completely open process. You're always welcome to come and watch us test the machines, test the ballots. To perform the test, we do run test ballots. Every ballot style is tested, and every machine is tested. Every machine that's used on Election Day, that's both the DS200 tabulator and the Express Vote, the ADA machine. We test them all. We are ensuring that each machine is accurately reading the ballots and accurately tabulating. If a machine fails, it's fixed and it's retested, ensuring an accurate test, or it's simply not deployed. Once the machines are tested, they're sealed with a tamper-evident seal, and they are securely stored in the city clerk's office or the municipal clerk's office until they are deployed on Election Day. Municipal clerks are also responsible for scheduling poll workers. You might hear me refer to them as poll workers, election officials. There's a lot of different names. They do the same thing. But we're always scheduling to ensure an adequate number of poll workers at each site, depending on the anticipated turnout. Of course, those elections with a higher turnout, we're always scheduling additional election inspectors. Each polling place is then also required to have at least one chief inspector at the polling place at all times on Election Day. Before each election, we also train our poll workers. I, for example, typically have two, I call them like 101 trainings. It's like a baseline training. We cover everything. We'll do at least one or two of those throughout the year. And then my other trainings are typically focused on specific topics. But I offer training before every election. And then within the last few days leading up to the election, clerks are printing the poll books, we're printing absentee ballot logs, and then we are preparing setup of our polling places. The election equipment is delivered, set up, all the voting booths, and then all of the supplies that are needed, your poll books, all the documentation, all your pens and pencils, and more pens and pencils, and everything that is needed. All of that is delivered, set up, so that when Election Day comes, we're ready.
Okay, so clearly the municipal clerk has a lot to do, and I would like to point out, I thought about this a lot. So I served on the U.S. Election Assistance Commission Board of Advisors. I served on the election committee in the National Conference of State Legislatures, and I met a lot of people from around the country that ran things differently. And I often thought that most states have county clerks that actually run the elections, and then they have to hire people to run each precinct or polling place and have confidence that they're well-trained and trustworthy. And I thought, would I want to do that any differently? And Ginny, I don't think we would. The municipal clerk has skin in the game. They know their constituents. They have a relationship with the people in their community. They have a responsibility to the people in their community. So I think Wisconsin has it quite right with how we do it. I know for an election commission or government accountability board or state election board or whatever you want to call it, the entity at the state level, it's a little bit of a challenge because they have to be in connection with all of these entities, whereas in other states it's the county clerk that would, but the county clerk does anyway, because you're truly passed a law that the county clerk in every county is the chief election official in every county. So that really does require a partnership with the municipality. So that's my 2 cents on how Wisconsin runs elections and why you should have even more confidence in the electoral process in Wisconsin, because those municipal clerks have skin in the game. Statewide voter database. Who wants to take that?
Yeah, so this is the state's system where all of the clerks are required to enter information into the database. I don't know if we have a next slide. All right, so in the database, clerks are required to enter into the state's database things like when a voter registered. So when you register to vote, you fill out a form or you go online and use that process. That all goes to your municipal clerk, and then they get to decide whether or not you are indeed eligible, you have met the requirements for registration, and then they enter you into the statewide system. The same is true of absentee. The statutes say that the clerks have to track when they issue somebody an absentee ballot. So when you ask for an absentee ballot, it's not sort of this willy-nilly process. The clerks have to first look at the system, see that you are indeed registered to vote, you're eligible to vote, and then they issue you an absentee ballot. They then track that in the system, and then when the ballot comes back, they're checking that ballot back into the system, right? So if they got your ballot back and they went into the system and they looked you up and they see that they never issued you a ballot, that's a huge red flag, right? And so that's why tracking things in the system is required and something that has to be done to make sure that all of the lists and the information are accurate. List maintenance is another process that we do in the statewide system. And there are there's very few things that the state does. Most of these things happen at the local level. So things like registration list alerts. And what that is the state, we get information from places like the Department of Corrections, the Department of Vital Records, and they tell us if somebody's become a felon or has since become deceased. And then we send an alert to the clerk and say, hey, it looks like your voter is now deceased. You need to look at this information and decide whether or not to deactivate that person. Because again, they're the only ones that have that authority. We can't do that at the state. But we get them a lot of information through the state system so that they can keep the lists up to date. The same with adjudicated incompetent. So if a court has declared somebody incompetent, which is really important as well, that somebody has to be declared incompetent by a court. It can't just be somebody saying, hey, I think this person is no longer capable of voting. It has to be a court process. Those records come from the court system and then are provided to the local jurisdictions as well. I will note that there is a statutory change that would make that a lot easier, so we're hoping that in the future that can sort of be automated so it's pushed through as easily as some of the other things. Same with DMV checks. So our system is able to talk to the DMV's database in some ways allowed by statute. And when somebody registers to vote, if there's a difference in how they registered, what their information appears as, and what's in their DMV record, that's flagged for the clerk, so they can then go work with that voter to get that information corrected. And that's something that's happening every night. We're also looking for things like duplicates. So let's say I was registered to vote in La Crosse and I moved to Eau Claire. The system would see that and would send an alert to the clerk and say, hey, we've now got 2 records for Megan Wolf here. She can only have 1. So if she's moved, you need to merge that record. You need to make sure that only 1 is active. There's also audits that are conducted after an election. So let's say something does slip through the cracks. Let's say somebody shows up, they have been recently found to be a felon, and it wasn't on the poll books. So they didn't know when the person voted that they had just been become a felon. That is audited after the election through the statewide system so that those people can then be charged after the fact. So that's not ideal. Of course, we always want to have that happening before, and 99% of the time it does. It happens before they're removed from the list, but in those rare circumstances, it is caught afterwards, and those referrals are then made to the district attorneys and to the Department of Corrections. So, and interestingly enough, with those reports after the election, we're required to post those on our website and provide them to the legislature. So after each election, any instances of voter fraud, are reported to the legislature and available for your review on our website. So you can see those few times when, you know, there are crimes that are committed. That's something that we provide a report on. There's also the ERIC process, and what ERIC is the Electronic Registration Information Center. And ERIC provides us information, again, that we can use for those registration list alerts for clerks. ERIC is not a vendor that has access to the statewide system. ERIC is simply a data source. So one of the things that ERIC provides is information about people that might have moved. So let's say somebody was registered in Wisconsin and they've now moved to another state. ERIC gives us that information and says, hey, you've got a voter on your rolls that is now registered to vote in Colorado. So then the clerk is able to remove that voter from the voter rolls. The same is true within the state. If somebody moves within the state, they're a double check for that process. And another really important part of that is if somebody dies out of state. We wouldn't know that through Wisconsin's Department of Vital Records. And so ERIC allows us access to that information. If somebody passes away in another state that's an ERIC member, we're going to get that alert, and then the clerk will get that information to be able to update the voter list. There is also a postcard process where if somebody is eligible to be registered to vote according to the DMV's records, but they're not yet on the voter registration rolls, they get a simple postcard that says, you might be eligible to register to vote. If you'd like to register to vote, here's how you do it. They don't get a form, they're not automatically registered, they just get that information so they can register if they'd like to. And then finally, this is a process that the state actually does conduct pertaining to list maintenance. So all those other things are really clerk-led processes, which has been affirmed by the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, is that those are things that only a clerk can do. But at the state level, we conduct a process that's called 4-year list maintenance. And it's a little confusing because it actually happens every 2 years. So every 2 years after a general election, the law says we have to look back and see who has not participated in the last 4 years. And if somebody has not participated in the last 4 years, they get a postcard that says, hey, you haven't participated in the last 4 years. Do you still want to remain on the poll list? Are you still living here? And if the clerk gets a postcard back from that voter where they affirm, yes, I do still live here, I want to stay on the list, then they stay on the list. But anybody we don't hear from, they're removed from the list. So this process was just conducted this summer for the 2022 election. We sent 116,000 postcards to voters. And of those, 108,000 voters were ultimately deactivated because we never heard back from those individuals. And that's pretty typical. It's a pretty low rate. And so it is a pretty effective way to identify people that probably have moved or are no longer eligible to vote here that are deactivated.
So Megan, before we go on to the next slide, it's okay. It's okay. So the question I have, precipitated by somebody who says things that aren't true, can you activate the deactive voter rolls? Can a clerk do that? And then hurry up and deactivate them again once the election is over? Because it would be clear that that was done when you compare poll lists.
That's right. So,
Okay.
you know, there's a lot of confusion, and sort of rightfully so. Wisconsin, not to get into the details, but we're exempt from a federal law that most states have. And so how we have to do list maintenance is prescribed by our state laws here in Wisconsin. And, you're either active or you're inactive, and you're not eligible for a ballot. What does active status mean? Active status simply means you're a registered voter. If you wanted to vote at the polls, your name is going to be on the poll list. If you wanted to get an absentee ballot, you'd be eligible because you're a registered voter. An inactive record, which is available for people to buy to inspect that list, that's just historical. If I'm on the inactive list and I put in a request for an absentee ballot, I would not receive it because I am not in the system available for a clerk to even issue a ballot to me. If I'm an inactive voter, I'm not on the poll list, right? So if I show up on election day, I won't be able to get a ballot. So when you hear this conversation about inactive records, all that is history. And I think history is pretty darn important to keep. You know, you think about anything else in state government, we can't just throw away the records. We can't just throw away the history. We've got to keep those historical records. And so that's all that inactive records are. They're not something that's available for somebody just to be turning on and off and on and off. All of that could be seen if somebody purchased the statewide list, because they can buy both active and inactive records, and they can see exactly when and why those changes were made.
So if I'm on the inactive list because I didn't make it through the 4-year purge or whatever you
Yep.
call it, so I went to my clerk and I said I want to vote. They would hand me a voter registration form where I would have to provide my residency information, and I would have to provide them my Wisconsin ID and re-register completely, correct?
Yep, that's exactly right. If you're deactivated for any reason, you became a felon, you moved, you didn't respond to the 4-year maintenance postcard, once you're deactivated, the only way back on the list to be able to get a ballot is to re-register to vote. So, there's probably some very rare circumstances where somebody makes a mistake. Like in a clerk's office, they marked the wrong person as deceased, and then they realize it later, and then they have
They're
to go
alive.
correct that. Yeah. But that's very, very rare. And again, that's something that's tracked. All those movements are tracked in the system.
Perfect. Let's move on to my vote.
So My Vote is the public-facing portal for WisVote. So you can go to myvote.wi.gov, and that's where voters can go to interact with their voter record. So on My Vote, you can find your polling place, you can view an absentee ballot, you can track your absentee ballot. So the system's going to know if you've requested an absentee ballot, if it's been sent to you, if it's been received by your clerk. All of that's going to be available on My Vote. My Vote even tracks most absentees through the mail process as well. So if something got stalled in the mail, you'd be able to see that on My Vote as well. Through My Vote, you can register to vote. So state law allows for online voter registration when you can match all your information with the DMV. And so you can do that on My Vote as well. And you can request an absentee ballot. Your request goes to your clerk, and then they decide if you're eligible to receive that ballot. Pretty much anything you need to do as a voter, you're able to do through the My Vote system. It's important to note that the My Vote system, that's just an interface to the data your clerks are entering at the local level. So this is not some separate system that has different state data. This is real-time data being entered by your municipal clerk. And so when you register to vote, when you request an absentee ballot, all that's reflected when your clerk enters that information into the statewide voter registration system. Same with polling places. Before an election day, the polling places are all entered into there as well, so that you know where you go. I could get really into the weeds about some of the mapping technology that's used here too, but it's a pretty advanced system that allows, based on your address, to make sure that you're looking at the right sample ballot and that you're looking at the right polling place for election day.
So to expand on My Vote, has My Vote ever been hacked?
No, My Vote is just a web interface, so no, My Vote is not hacked, and it does interface with the statewide database, which, as we talked about before, has never had any sort of a breach.
Okay, so if I were to request an absentee for my daughter, because I happen to know her date of birth, I'm going to hit a nerve here, and will I receive the absentee ballot on her behalf? And if I have all her information, which is something that happened to our speaker in the assembly, can you explain how that can happen, whether we should have maybe double authentication, hint, hint, on that, and maybe you'll want to delve into, now bear in mind, they can see every single thing that happens in the system, and they know what IP address actually got that information and then follow up on that IP address. so they can be prosecuted for doing this illegal thing. But I'm talking about prevention from doing that illegal thing. With that and with the request for military, Wisconsin has an old, outdated law that allows the military to request an absentee without being registered, and we are correcting that currently through the legislature, as I understand it. But the person who did that worked in the Milwaukee clerk's office and did it to prove we have a vulnerability, which is fair. We do have a vulnerability. That would be one of them. But it was determined through the IP address who did that, correct? And so you can't always get away with crime, but we want to try to prevent crime. And so what I want you to do is to explain what WEC and the legislature is doing to address those two issues.
Sure. So requesting an absentee ballot, that's where we'll start. When you request an absentee ballot, the law says you have to submit a request to your clerk in writing. So through My Vote, when you go into My Vote, you have to first find your voter registration record, right? And so that's a whole step that's different from if you wrote your request for an absentee on a napkin, because that's allowed by law too. You could write your absentee ballot request on a napkin and you could send it over to your municipal clerk. You could say, here's my name, here's my information, I'd like to receive an absentee ballot, and you have to provide your photo ID the first time, no matter how you submit that application. Through My Vote, you have to first find your voter record, then you can make that request, you can upload your photo ID through that process. The number one safeguard we have is your clerk. All this has to go through your clerk before they can issue you a ballot. Let's say somebody did what you just described. They have somebody else's information. They go in, they make a request. That's breaking the law. When you make your request or you register to vote, you're certifying that you are the person that's making that request, that you're lawfully making that request. And if you choose to break the law, which we saw somebody that did choose to break the law, then you will be found and you will be prosecuted, because we have all that information. And I think nothing makes election officials more angry than people who commit election fraud. I think it's really a deeply disturbing thing. And so we have that ability to be able to find those instances and to catch them and, to have that brought to justice right away.
Oh, I'm done asking questions. So I would like to open it up to all of you to go ahead and raise your hand and ask a question. We do have a microphone man here who will help you, because we are live streamed. So we want to make sure that the people out in internet world have an opportunity to hear your question. So are there any questions? Yay, I thought we were so thorough.
Yeah, but they need it on.
Oh, okay. Okay, what's gonna happen this year with the notification being when our Tribune has went down to 3 days a week? And a lot of people, when they did that, canceled their Tribune subscription.
I mean, for us, we're still required to publish it in the paper. There's a little caveat that says we can publish it, it's supposed to be the day before the election, but we can choose an alternate day if we feel there's higher readership. We used to publish it on Sundays, but now that they're only published it Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, we'll have to change that publication to Saturday. That's something that's out of our control. We just have to publish it. There's some counties, some papers that only publish once a week. But we also publish everything on our website. We try to put all the type E notices, which is the absentee voting hours. We put the type A's, which is if the referendums. All that information can be found, right on the county's website. I publish for all the municipalities. So there's one location that you can find that information.
Anyone else?
I know you touched on this a little bit earlier. How do you identify voters who are citizens versus non-citizens?
So That is actually not something that law allows election officials to do right now. So it is a self-certification. So when somebody registers to vote, just like we talked about, people have opportunities where they can break the law. When you register to vote, you have to certify that you're eligible and that you are a U.S. citizen. There isn't a system that checks that information, and that's not something that's currently allowed or available under our law. That being said, we have seen instances where people, very, very few, I don't mean it to make it sound like there's a lot of them, but there have been some instances where individuals, have registered to vote while they were in green card status or before their naturalization process finished, and it's resulted in some pretty severe penalties in terms of them being deported and other things. So just in instances I've heard about. So it is a self-certification. There isn't a system available or allowable under state law right now.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I have a couple of questions. One is that person, couple of questions. One is that person that pointed out the deficiency, were they given a cash reward in helping you point out the deficiency? Because I think the fact that they did it on purpose to point out the deficiency, they should be rewarded, not prosecuted.
There's no excuse for breaking the law, in my opinion, and this is where I'm going to step in, because you can talk to them about deficiencies. You can go to your legislator and talk about deficiencies. You can bring up problems in the proper channels. But deliberately breaking the law to prove a point, they don't get rewarded. They broke the law.
I'll yield to that. My other question is, why do absentee voters get to vote after 8 o'clock at night, after the polls close? I can't go in and cast a ballot after 8 o'clock at night, but absentee voters can, because the ballots aren't counted during the day in some cases. In many cases, they're not counted during the day when the polls are open, when everyone else votes. And here's why I bring that up. In 2020, in August, one of the campaign experts was on Sunday morning shows, and they reassured people that on election night in November, it will appear that Donald Trump has won by a landslide. However, after all the polls close and all the absentee ballots are counted, Joe Biden will win.
Okay. Nikki, you go with that, and then I'll have a comment afterward.
So there is every effort made to get absentees processed during Election Day. Depending on the numbers, it's just simply not possible. We cannot start processing absentee ballots until polls open on Election Day. And then our priority is for those individuals coming in and voting in person. We do have election workers that are processing absentees, but they're treated just as, and I'll get into it when we get to the Election Day piece of absentees. They're working with those absentees. Depending on the number, it just may simply not be possible. But then as far as what is reported in the media on election night, it's always very important to remember that those results are unofficial. Nothing is final until canvasses have occurred and those results are certified.
Okay, a case in point there.
Kathy, can I say one thing first?
Sure, Jenny, go ahead.
There's also a difference between casting your ballot and counting your ballot. When an absentee voter gets their ballot and they mark who they're voting for and folds that up and puts that in the envelope and they sign it and have a witness sign it, they now have cast their ballot. It doesn't get counted till Election Day. So you're not having people cast their ballots after the polls close. They're just simply being processed and counted.
That's a good point.
Just real quick too, no ballots can be received after 8 p.m. on election day. You know, in other states, that's actually different. So, you know, sometimes on the news you'll hear in some places they're still getting ballots, they're still counting days and days after. In Wisconsin, they have to be in your clerk's hands by 8 o'clock on election day or they cannot be counted. We have no late return allowed here in the state of Wisconsin. And another interesting thing is the clerks by law can't adjourn on election night. So once they start counting, they've got to keep counting until they're done. They can't go home and pick up the next day. That's not the case in some other states. So just wanted to offer that.
I think that's an excellent point. Once they start counting, tabulating or whatever, they have to continue that. If you were in line at 8 o'clock, you can cast your ballot as long as you're in line. Well, those envelopes are in line. When I ran for county clerk, I stand corrected. When I ran for the state assembly, I finished up in Chippewa County very early. We had call-in process. We had a great process. By 10:30, we were good to go. So I took off to the Eau Claire GOP party, and I walked in, and I was nearly 1,000 votes up. And I knew that none of Eau Claire was in yet. And I said, tisk, 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 don't applaud yet. Eau Claire has to come in yet. And so tisk, tisk, tisk on Donald Trump's people, because they had to wait for all of the votes to be counted in a very highly Democrat area. You just know that. You have to be enough votes ahead as a Republican in order to secure that election for office. And bottom line, I won on election night by 87 votes when I was nearly 1,000 ahead. So there's a lot of people in Eau Claire that weren't my fans. So the fact of the matter, although I was really proud, the 16th Ward of Eau Claire finally figured out who I am, and I got 50% of the vote, when as county clerk I only got 40. So, I mean, it was a great, you know, but you just, and I'm sorry. His people, that campaign, had to know that. And in this day and age, I'm going to get on my soapbox now. This day and age, where it's fashionable to not tell the truth, it's fashionable to pretend something that is not actually true. His people had to know he had to be so much ahead going into Milwaukee in order to, or Dane County, whatever, in order to win the election in Wisconsin. And so to pretend that they didn't know, no one knew that he was going to lose because of whatever went on in Milwaukee just cannot be true. We all know the percentages in every municipality that you have to get in order to win an election. And so it's perpetuating this misinformation and disinformation continually down the line to make these assertions that are not true. And that is a bipartisan problem we have with Democrats and Republicans telling us things and just demanding that we believe it, even though we know it can't be possibly true. And so if you repeat it enough, it must be true. We have to move on. How are we doing on time? You've killed us. I've killed them. Not literally. Take it away. Election day.
Okay, I'll be really quick. On election day, well, on every day, these are the stars of the show, right? We're at the state, yeah, truly. The state, we are just there to answer phone calls and provide support. So, you know, I start my election day probably somewhere around 4 o'clock in the morning, and I probably end sometime around 4 o'clock the next morning, if I'm lucky. And it's just answering calls. So we answer at the Elections Commission. We have 34 full-time staff at the Elections Commission. We're a standalone independent agency, very small. We answer over 1 million phone calls to our office in the month around an election, and I'm not kidding. We put it down our phone and we pick it back up all day, every day around an election. But we love it. I love Election Day. I would agree with Lisa in Rock County. Election Day is amazing. It's awesome. You can just feel, that you're serving your state and your community, and there's just an excitement about it, and you're helping people in real time. So that's what we're doing on Election Day, and now I'll turn it over to the people that matter on Election Day.
So on Election Day, my most stressful part of the day is between 7 a.m. and 7:05 a.m. I don't know if I can back it up.
Sorry.
That's because that's the time when I get phone calls saying the machines aren't reading ballots. At 7:05, then I know most of them have a voter that has voted and the machines are reading properly and I can now relax. But again, I hope on Election Day I'm extremely bored and I'm sitting in my office with nothing to do, because that means everything out there is working the way it's supposed to. We're fielding calls from voters. They're going to be asking us what's on my ballot, where do I go vote, what do I need to bring with me. We're going to be supporting the clerks. They are the stars on Election Day. I'm just in the background helping, really. The municipal clerks really do what they need to do on Election Day, along with the poll workers. But we're there to support them if something happens, if there are incidents, if it's odd situations, they're calling us, we're trying to help them. We may be reaching out to WIC to do that. We're also there if the DS200s break down, we can run out there, I can try to fix them. If not, we have spares in my office, we'll just quickly swap them out so voting can continue. And we're preparing for election night. We're doing the final test of the modems, the service, the equipment in my office to make sure we can receive results, and we're preparing reports to post online. So until 8 o'clock on Election Day, we hope to be very bored in our office.
Well, municipal clerks are not bored on Election Day. But I will confirm that we do have tremendous support at both the county and the state level. So in these next few slides, we'll just cover some of the Election Day activities that don't keep us bored. So as I mentioned a little earlier, we test all of our equipment. When it's tested, we seal the memory sticks with the tamper-evident security seals. Those security seals remain intact in those machines from the time they're tested until the final totals tapes are run and the machines are returned back to the clerk. The security seals are confirmed, verified by the chief inspector before 7 a.m. and again at 8 p.m., verifying that there was no tampering with those memory sticks. The election equipment stays sealed and locked and secured throughout the day on Election Day. And again, until those totals tapes have been run and the results announced at the polls. Before the polls open at 7 a.m., the election inspectors are running a zero tape. That is verifying that there are 0 ballots, 0 votes on that memory stick before the first ballot goes through that machine after 7 a.m. That zero tape also remains intact in that machine until the totals tape is run after 8 p.m. Throughout the day, the election equipment remains locked and all ballot stock and all election documentation remains in the custody of the sworn election officials. Election activity is also recorded on inspector statements. That's where the security seals are verified and all incidents are recorded. Inspector statements are actually completed for every reporting unit as well. So every machine, every reporting unit, security seals written, all incidents reported. On Election Day, before ballots are issued, voters must be registered. So they're either pre-registered, so their name is pre-printed on the poll book, or they may register on Election Day. Voter registration ensures only those individuals that are meeting state eligibility requirements are allowed to vote. The residency requirement is 28 days, and everyone on Election Day must provide proof of residence in order to register. Voters must state their name and address out loud so that election officials and observers are able to hear. Voters must show acceptable photo ID, and they must sign the poll book. Unless there is an allowed exception to these rules, a ballot is not issued unless a person states, shows, and signs. For photo identification, when election officials are looking at photo identification, they're confirming that the name conforms to what is printed in the poll book. So for example, Robert and Bob, that's conforming, it's similar. Elizabeth, Beth, that's conforming, it's similar. They're also confirming that the photo reasonably resembles the elector. Now there, we have our driver's licenses for what, 8 years now? So you have to be, a little cautious there, but so they are confirming that it reasonably resembles. Photo ID proves who you are. So the address does not need to match your photo ID. The address matters when you're registering to vote because that is proving where you live. Also, if using a Wisconsin driver's license, it does not have to be the real ID, but it does need to meet the expiration date guidelines. And that is always the date of the last general election. So going into the 2024 elections, the expiration date for those identifications that have an expiration requirement, that date will be November 8th, 2022. If elector cannot present acceptable photo identification, that is one reason or one situation that an elector may vote a provisional ballot. But what's important to remember is that individual then must bring acceptable photo identification to the municipal clerk's office by 4 o'clock on the Friday following the election in order for that provisional ballot to be counted and their votes added to the totals. This slide here shows you an example of what a poll book looks like. So pre-registered individuals are pre-printed on the poll books with their name and their address. And then they have a signature block next to it. When an elector states their name and address, election officials are verifying that that name conforms to what they're showing for photo ID. And then they're verifying that their stated address matches what's in the poll book. If the address differs, that means they've moved and they're going to have to re-register. And perhaps it may be at a different polling location. Once verified, the elector then signs the poll book. As you can see in the third block, I believe it's line 7 in the slide picture, if a person is issued an absentee ballot, there is going to be a watermark that is printed on the poll book, so that it's upside down, but it says absentee returned. That means that individual was issued an absentee ballot and it was returned. It was recorded in WisVote. So when the poll book printed, it printed that watermark that the absentee ballot was returned. If that person shows up on election day wishing to vote, they are not able to because they already cast an absentee ballot and they are locked into that absentee ballot. Another watermark that might show up on the poll book is absentee issued. So an absentee would have been sent to the individual. Again, that's recorded in WisVote. It wasn't returned, meaning it wasn't checked back into WisVote. So when the poll book printed, the watermark is going to say absentee issued. In those situations, the election inspectors still must confirm that an absentee wasn't returned, perhaps after the time the poll book printed, right? Because we print our poll books a couple days in advance. So if the watermark says absentee issued, our election inspectors look to the absentee ballot log, which is a list of all absentee ballots issued, and they'll also indicate if they were returned. So they'll look to that log. They'll look for that person's name, and they will see if the log indicates that the ballot was returned. If it was, again, they are not allowed an election day ballot. If the log says that the ballot was issued, they then should be asking the elector, did you return your absentee ballot? Did you place it in the mail to your municipal clerk, or did you personally deliver it? If they respond, yes, I did, I put it in the mail, however, it didn't make it to the clerk's office, you returned an absentee ballot. They are not able to vote an election day ballot. Only if they did not vote and return, maybe the ballot is sitting at home. It was not returned to the clerk. Only in that situation would they be allowed to vote an election day ballot. So those are some of the safeguards that are alerts to the election workers on when they may and may not issue ballots, election day ballots to absentee voters. On to processing absentees. So again, I mentioned absentee ballots and the accompanying absentee ballot logs are delivered to the respective polling places on election day in secured, sealed bags. These are then verified upon receipt by the chief inspector. At that time, once they begin processing, they are in an area in the polling place identified as absentee processing, and they will then open that secure bag and begin processing those absentee ballots. So they're processed during the day, and they are treated just as an election day ballot or an election day voter. So the election official is going to state the name and the address, reading it off of the certificate envelope. They're going to state that aloud, again, so that any observers or anybody in the area can hear, just as the election day voters are announcing their name and address aloud. Election officials are then reviewing the ballot certificate envelope, making sure they're sufficient. So by sufficient, I mean, have they been opened and resealed, or do they appear to be tampered with? Has the voter signed? Has a witness signed? Has the witness provided an acceptable address or sufficient address? And is the elector perhaps ineligible to vote? Maybe from the time they cast their ballot and submitted it to the clerk, they passed away, or maybe they became a felon. If there is knowledge or an understanding of that occurring, those ballots are then insufficient and not counted. So they'll look at all of those ballots, and they will determine that sufficiency. If all of those required elements are there, the ballot is then considered sufficient. It's issued a voter number. That voter number is recorded in both poll books. There's a city book, there's a county book. It's recorded in the absentee ballot log, and that voter number is also recorded on the certificate envelope. There may be times during the day, election day, that an election official has to remake a ballot. So situations where ballots are remade is perhaps somebody submitted an absentee ballot and they spilled their coffee on it. And it smudged the ballot enough where it's not going to read properly through the machine. They're going to remake that ballot. Or maybe the ballot was torn. If there's any type of tear in the ballot, we don't want to send it through the machine. It may jam the machine and cause issue. There's also paper ballots, ballots that come back on paper, because military and overseas electors are allowed to receive their ballot by email. So they're printing their ballot out, they're placing it inside a certificate envelope that we send them their certificate, they've got to tape it to an envelope. They are placing that paper ballot inside that secured envelope and returning it to the clerk, which is then sent to the polling place. Those envelopes are not opened prior to election day. So it's a paper ballot that's inside there. We cannot have paper go through our DS200 machine. So those are remade. Remaking a ballot is a two-person job. The election inspectors are then announcing that they're remaking a ballot and why they're remaking a ballot. So one election inspector will read, because they're remaking it exactly the way that original is. One election inspector will read and the other will write, will, fill out the new ballot. That new ballot then is what goes to the machine. We always keep, in those situations where it's read-made ballots, we always keep that, we call it the original ballot, so the damaged ballot, so that if there were ever a recount, you can always compare the two ballots. They're sequentially numbered. Original ballot 1, remade ballot 1, so that you can, only the one ballot went through the machine, but the other one is secured with the voted ballots at the end of the night, so that in the event of a recount, you compare them and you can see that the duplicate ballot, the remade ballot, was remade identical to that original. This next slide here is on election observers. So anyone other than a candidate on a ballot may observe the voting process on election day. Individuals wishing to observe, they must check in with the chief inspector. They must show ID. They must sign an observer log. They must wear an observer tag identifying them as an observer. They follow rules at a glance. That is a brochure that is issued to the observer upon arrival. The chief inspector will give them that rules at a glance. So that basically alerts them to what they can and what they can't do. The observers direct their questions to the chief inspectors, and then they follow the 3 to 8 foot rule. And what that is the observation areas, which are generally by the voter registration table, by the poll book table, and then if there's an absentee ballot processing area, that's another observable area. So those observation areas are no less than 3 feet from the tables, but no more than 8, allowing them to see and hear the activity going on at those stations. What observers are not allowed to do is to make voice phone calls or take video. They should avoid engaging with voters. They are not allowed to wear campaign items. They are not allowed to engage in electioneering. And just to say, nobody is allowed to wear campaign items and nobody is allowed to engage in electioneering in the polling places. And then observers are not allowed to view confidential information. So if there's a confidential page to the poll book, if there's a confidential elector in the municipality, they're not able to see that page of the poll book. Megan, did you want to add more to this slide?
I just have one quick thing. So I just wanted to point out that the Elections Commission, so the 6-member commission right now, they're working on an observer administrative rule, and I will not get into administrative rules after 7 o'clock at night because I don't think that's good for anybody. But they're looking to clarify the process for observers, because right now the law says you have to be 3 to 8 feet. It doesn't say what can you see, what parts of the process can you be engaged with. So they have a committee they formed, and this committee is made up of the broadest spectrum of people that have different political opinions. I mean, people who, if they met each other on the street, probably wouldn't agree on a thing. These folks have all been sitting down and working on this rule that hopefully will have passed in time for next year's election. So I'm really happy and pleased that we're going through this effort, because I think it's going to be a really incredible rule that makes it so observers aren't frustrated, clerks aren't frustrated, everybody's very clear on what the law is, and it has that really bipartisan input on the fine points of that. I should also mention a lot of clerks are involved in that process as well.
Now we're on to election night. So on election night, when polls close, election inspectors are verifying that all ballots are processed. So that all absentee ballots have been processed before they are closing out their poll. And what I mean by that is closing out their machine. Once confirmed, they are able to run that totals tape, which shows the total number of ballots cast and the totals then for the candidates on the ballot. Those results are then transmitted to the county clerk, and the receipt and accuracy of that transmission is verified. And again, as I stated a bit ago, it is always important to remember, because these results are then uploaded to the county website, so they're viewable to everybody as the results come in. So as they are transmitted, the county clerk is uploading them to the website as soon as possible because everybody wants to know what happened. But what's important to remember again is that those results are unofficial until they are canvassed and certified. And then another thing important to remember is even though those results are transmitted via modem, those results always remain on that memory stick. So they are still there on that memory stick. On election night, we are also required to enter any provisional ballots into WisVote, and that is also posted on the county website. Election workers then reconcile the number of ballots to the number of voters. If there is any discrepancy in those numbers, they have to be able to explain that and they have to document that. So a discrepancy might be maybe a voter number was issued twice, the same voter number was issued twice, or perhaps a voter number wasn't issued at all. So if there's a discrepancy between the ballot, total ballots cast, and total voters or voter slips issued, they have to find those discrepancies and document them. Election workers then have to look through every single ballot for eligible write-ins. If they do discover eligible write-ins, those are then all tallied on write-in tally sheets. The voted ballots are then secured into tamper-evident security bags, and those bags are signed by the chief inspector and party-affiliated election workers. The election workers then have to reconcile the poll books and the absentee ballot logs, making sure that all the books have the exact same voter number for the same voter, that any notes made are exactly the same. They have to be identical. So they have to go through all of that reconciliation after the polls close. At this point then, because the results have been printed, they have been announced, the tamper-evident seals on the memory sticks are broken. The sticks are removed from the machine, and then they are securely transported to the municipal clerk's office, along with all of the voted ballots and the election documents. All phases are secure and transparent. Most processes and procedures require 2 sworn election workers and of opposing party affiliation if available. And again, all of these processes are observable. Municipal Board of Canvassers. So following each election, the Municipal Board of Canvassers convenes. For municipalities with 1 polling location, the election inspectors are the Municipal Board of Canvassers, and they convene on election night. For municipalities with multiple polling locations, they convene after Election Day, and the Board of Canvassers is made up of the municipal clerk and then 2 other qualified electors of the municipality. The Municipal Board of Canvassers must convene so when it is a municipality with multiple polling places and the canvassing board meets after the election, they have to convene no later than 9 a.m. on the Monday following the election. So what they do is they review the election documents, and then if needed, they are rejecting or adding the totals from any provisional ballots to the results totals, and then they're signing the canvass statement. The Municipal Board of Canvassers has to finish. They have to adjourn before 4 p.m. on that Monday in order for the municipal canvassing results to be transferred to the county for their county canvass.
So election night, the other stressful part of my day is 8 p.m. when polls close until the first modem results come in. Because then we're just worried if they're coming in or not coming in. So you can see me staring at my workstation, hitting refresh over and over and over until the first modem results come in, and then I'm more happy and relaxed. But the clerks modem in the results on election night. We only have 2 municipalities that actually brings in their media sticks to us because they're unable to modem. But we also have a check in place, checks and balances, where once the clerks modem those results, they also call my office. We ask them how many ballots were cast, what's the ballot cast on the tape you printed off, and then I compare that with what was modem in. So we know if you had 504 ballots cast, what you modem in also says 504 ballots cast. So we can compare those totals. Still unofficial results, but at least we know what's coming in is accurate. We create the reports that we post online for the media and the public to get the results as soon as we can. I probably post results every 15 to 20 minutes as long as results are coming in, so we get those out rather quickly. And again, these are unofficial results. We're posting results so you can get them quick, but they are not the official results yet. We also post provisional ballot information on our website. Most municipal clerks don't have access to their website on election night. So we post it all on the county website. So again, it's all in one location for people to easily find. Either on election night or the days after is when the clerks start bringing all their supplies in that we keep secure in my office. That includes the ballots, the paperwork, used absentee certificate envelopes, anything rejected, incident logs, poll books, supplemental poll books, the election media sticks. Those are all kept securely in my office until we are done with our board of canvass.
And then the third level of double checking, we don't even have it in there, but the state also does a canvas. So there is 3 levels of certification
We're trying to
in
consolidate.
elections. So, and just want to throw in there, every step of certification, so I think the point about results are unofficial on election night. And that's confusing, right? Because when you're looking at the news and you see the tickers come in and the results are coming in and you're, rooting for your candidate, you think that that's happening in real time. You think that those are the official results. They are not. And I really appreciate the media and how they cover election events like this tonight. But on election night, they don't do a great job of explaining to people that those are unofficial results. And there's 3 levels of double checks, triple checks that go into making sure that we've got it exactly right. And the best part about Canvass at all 3 levels is anybody can come and observe. So if you want to know what's taking Milwaukee so long to count all their absentees, why don't we have their results yet? You can go on down to Milwaukee and you can be a part of that process. You can watch as they're counting those absentee ballots. And so, I think that's pretty cool. And I think, I get it, people want results fast, but I think the fact that so much work goes into making sure that the results are right and that you can watch it is really important. And I wish that process got a little more attention.
Obviously, the municipal clerks, the county clerks, and the poll workers are extraordinarily busy on Christmas Day. So God bless you all for the work you've done on that. Speaking of clerks, Onalaska City Clerk Joanne Marcon is here, so pleasure to have you here. Nice, see, she's learning right along with all of us on the importance of elections and how we need to work together on elections. The town of Shelby. See, if you're a local official, would you please raise your hand? Well, so we only missed 2 of you, so we got you. Anyway, thank you for your service. I've served on my village board in my county and all that sort of thing too. So, do you have any questions on what goes on election day?
I do.
Okay.
Get these guys.
Get him first? Okay.
I have a few questions about the observer part of it. As a voter, do I have a right to see the observer log?
The observer log is confidential on election day, but you can request to see that through record request through the clerk's office following the day after even election day.
Okay, and they should be wearing a name tag too, correct?
Observers are required to wear a name tag, yes, identifying them as an observer.
When they sign into the observer log, are they printing and a signature, or is it just printing or signature? Because, you know, they could be an observer and they just do a signature and nobody can read it. They wouldn't know who they were.
I am pretty certain that
Both?
they have to print and sign, yes.
Okay. Okay. Now, if you want to be an observer, can you only be an observer in the ward that you live in, that you vote in, or could you go anywhere?
You can go anywhere.
So I could go to Toma or Madison and observe theirs, and I have really no business there.
You can, yes.
Okay. But if you want to see the log, but you would have to see it post-election or something, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I observed in the city of Milwaukee 6 polling places, and interestingly, we weren't an official observer, so we just kind of observed from afar. So I don't know how that works. Nikki, you might want to talk about that, but we just went into the polling places and just kind of stood around and watched. And you can do that. No one kicked us out, but I saw some pretty interesting things. But I also saw the poll workers upholding the law, and they did not take a lease agreement that wasn't signed. They didn't let a very drunk lady just vote, even though to get her out of there would have been a good idea. There was a polling place that had a strange setup, I thought, with the voter registration, election day voter registration, and they were kind of all bottled up. I mean, there was things that I observed that, you know, as a former county clerk, probably would have done differently. But, you know, if you think it's a mystery how Milwaukee does their elections, go down and observe the process. You know, I've heard 100 times, maybe 200 times, well, I trust my municipal clerk and my election officials, but I don't trust that Milwaukee. Well, go down there. They have friends, neighbors, relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, all working the polls, kind of like the rest of us. They might have some unique situations, because I've never seen a drunk person try to vote, but you know. But they do follow the laws. They're trained like the rest of us. And so if you have any questions, go visit Milwaukee. Next.
I have a grandson that's in the Navy. He grew up in Onalaska, Wisconsin, and did vote, I believe, when he was 18, registered to vote. But he's been in the Navy for 4 years. He's got 2 more. Is it possible for him to vote?
Yes, absolutely. He can register, he can vote, he will use, you know, his residence address, be it maybe that's still his home address here in La Crosse, but he's deployed elsewhere. Yeah, yep. And for military, again, we send the ballots out 21 days before an election, or if it's a federal election, 47 days. That is a deadline specific for military and overseas electors, that we get those ballots out sooner, allowing them that time to vote and get them back. But one thing also for military is we are allowed to email those ballots to them, so they even get the ballot quicker. There's also an option for them to get their ballot through MyVote. So he can actually sign up, register, sign up for an absentee, and receive his ballot as a military elector through MyVote.
Mike.
Yeah, thanks. Nikki, I think this one's for you, but I have, you know, I went through 18 elections, and I mean, I knew them well, and all of the clerks were outstanding. I mean, I think the clerks in this state do the job. I mean, I have no fear of that. My fear is when the ballot isn't in your hands. We have flooded the state through the indefinitely confined comment or statement with ballots. And we don't really know what's going on with those ballots. Not to mention the fact that we don't really know how they're being collected. I mean, we saw infamously the democracy in the park in Dane County. There was no democracy in the park in La Crosse County. I couldn't just walk down to the park and hand it to somebody and say, now I've voted. So the discrepancy between what happens in one county over the next, the fact that it's so much harder to vote in, say, the town of Burns absentee than it would be in the city of La Crosse. I mean, those are the things that I think really we need to try to address more than anything else. It is the dissemination and the collection and what happens to those ballots in between. I mean, as an example, you said, Megan, that we try to clear those rolls. But if I wanted to go out and find, people who haven't voted for, say, the last 6 years, and then sign them up as being indefinitely confined, now they're going to get a ballot. I found out that I know there's ways that it would be difficult. I could go to them and convince them to fill that out, but whatever. They're going to get a ballot. I find out they have that ballot. Now I go to their house. Now I sit down with them and say, I hear you have a ballot. I'd like to help you fill that out. They haven't voted for 6 years. They don't care. It's like, I don't know, maybe in my mail. Oh, it's right here. Let me help you fill that out. And they sit down and they do that with them. And they fill that ballot out with them. And they say, you just sign it here. Now, I can't tell you how to vote. I'm going to be voting for this individual, but I'm not telling you how to vote. So that happens, and let's say that happens 50 times in a community, 500 times in a community. You can pay volunteers to do those type of things. When the ballot isn't in your hands, when the ballot isn't being done by a clerk, that's what concerns me. And that's the area that I think more than anything we need to address as far as increasing the confidence and the security of our election process.
Nikki, do you want to comment on that? Or it's just a statement? Wasn't really a question. Okay, it was a statement. Let's ponder it.
Interesting observations. Keep Our Republic, I think, is serving the best interest of the state and is very, very well-meaning. But what I'm observing tonight is an obfuscation. We have a former elected official complaining about the distribution of the ballots. We have tens of thousands of Wisconsin citizens being disenfranchised as a result of the electoral system that we have in place. For a Democrat or a Republican, to ignore that is very disingenuous and is a threat to our democracy. Mike, I'm disappointed.
Who's being disenfranchised?
Mr. Hipsch.
I think he's talking about redistricting, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, that's a disenfranchise of a voter.
Okay.
If it's not done fairly according to our Constitution.
Okay, so keep our republic. Okay, that's
Disagree on that because I think maps aren't fair.
Well,
okay. We are.
no, wait, you said the maps are unfair?
No, I said I think they are fair.
Mike.
We are.
Yeah, that will, I'd love to have a conversation with you. I've attempted to have
Okay.
a conversation with you over the years. You've never gotten back to me.
What's your name?
Okay, so we're going to take.
Okay, got it. Go ahead.
Yeah, the redistricting conversation is a hyper partisan issue, clearly, and Keep Our Republic is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. And Mike wears more than one hat. I wear more than one hat. But as Keep Our Republic, we are not going to wade in to redistricting. That is not our mission here. Our mission is to educate the electorate on the electoral process.
Okay, question here and then one over there.
Real quick, first of all, thank you all for what you're doing and how you've presented everything. That is to be applauded, so thank you very much. It was mentioned earlier about, you go back and looking for quote-unquote fraud cases. I would love if you have any type of numbers, how many of those per election? The second question I had, and this kind of deals with what Mike was just talking about, is both maybe just for La Crosse County, what is our percentage of absentee ballots? And then what is that percentage here in the state of Wisconsin? Thank you.
I can tell you in the city of La Crosse, in the November 2022 election, there were 2 cases of an individual voting twice that were referred to the district attorney.
Yeah, and statewide, so after every election, we're required to submit a report to the legislature about any instances of voter fraud. So if a clerk makes a referral to their district attorney, and you can find all those throughout the years on our website. But in 2020, for example, there were, if I remember correctly, there were about 40. I want to say there were 42 instances of referrals. Then it's up to the district attorneys then to decide, what to do with those. A lot of general elections, there's less than 20 is a pretty standard number for us to see.
Okay, okay. Oh, yes. Ari, you want to talk about redistricting?
But he also asked about percentage of absentee voters, and I don't have the precise number in my head. I mean, if we're going to talk 2020, that November 2020 election, more than half of the voters in La Crosse County were absentee voters. Obviously, we were in COVID. Post that, the absentee voting percentage has come down, but not to where it was pre-COVID. I think people finally realized what absentee voting was and how convenient it was to have a ballot sent to your house. We put the postage on it, you just send it back. So we're still probably at 30-40% with the absentee voting.
Ari.
If I understood correctly, there's 2 locations here in the county that manually, physically deliver the media stick on election night.
That's correct.
So this is a, God forbid, hopefully 1% or less probability. If that car goes off the road accidentally or a nefarious actor tries to, what happens then to the data on that media stick? And then a corollary to that is statewide, what percentage would you say of municipalities are delivering to the central count facility manually? I bring this up because this has been gamed out extensively in the state of Michigan, with even talking about couriers and with state police and what have you. So
Those media sticks, once, as Nikki talked about, they break that seal, that media stick is pulled out. It is then put in it's a yellow bag that then closes and has a tamper evident seal. So if there should be an accident, that media stick is still secured within a bag within all of their supplies. If that tamper evident seal was broken, we would be able to tell if the stick was tampered with. If someone tried to put that stick into a computer and mess with it, it would break the code that's on there, and we would know immediately that those results can't be used because that secure code was broken. The same thing as if someone tried to jump in when we were modeming results and change them, they break that security code. My system won't accept that because that code is broken and we know that. We would then at some point, if that code or if the stick wasn't used, at some point get the ballots, and we would rerun those ballots with a new stick that we burn and count them that way. Obviously, that's going to take us a couple days. Our primary concern is going to be the clerk and what's going on. But at some point, everything has been secured in a bag, tamper evident seals, and at some point, we would recount those ballots. If we have to by hand, then that would be what we had to do.
Every single thing in the state of Wisconsin is done on paper. The inspector's statement, the tallies, the tapes, every single thing is on paper, right down to the ballots. So if something went wrong electronically or there was sabotage, we would be able to reconstruct the electoral system. Lee, do we need to move on?
Can I have a
No?
question?
Okay. He's in charge.
He gave me the mic. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. This has been informative for me. I've been able to watch recounts. I've been able to be in the county boardroom on a spring election when the ballots come in. Made the mistake of asking someone if I could help him with a ballot bag. Oh, did he say no? No, you cannot touch these. I was being naive. I was trying to be helpful. But I think overwhelmingly evidence shows that our elections in Wisconsin are secure. And I think the challenge that we have in the legislature when we're looking at legislation, as Kathy knows, is making sure that voting is accessible to people. We want everyone who can vote and wants to vote to be able to vote. then on the other side is our balance of making sure that there are regulations set up so that our elections are secure. I think we're in a good place. We are looking at legislation now that from Democrats and Republicans, and some that have Democrats and Republicans on the bills. It's starting to go through the legislature now. If you want information, call my office, Jill Billings. We'd be happy to give you information on legislation that's in front of us. And when I go to, I just want you all to know that when I go to Madison, I always go to the Constitutional Officers event at night when they're all there doing their learning every year. They do an event after hours. I always look for Ginny. She's usually surrounded by a bunch of clerks because Ginny, as young as she looks, she's an expert. And people around the state are always asking her. So I've got to pull her away to have an old fashioned with me. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I just want to say thank you all for the work, and Megan too. Thank you. Thank you all for the work you do.
Thank you. And now, without further ado, we're going to talk about security and transparency.
Kyle gets to talk now.
Kyle.
So I'm
Take
here
it away.
with ES&S, but what I want to talk about is true of any vendor that's here in Wisconsin. So just as in general, and the first one was kind of right on the heels of what we were just talking about. Is a couple points to make. Is number one, everything we do here in Wisconsin comes back to a paper voter verifiable trail. So if there's ever any doubt, if there's ever a problem, no matter what may happen, we can always go back to the ballots. So every voter is casting their ballot, it's getting recorded on paper in some way, shape, or form, and that is always available. Now, yeah, we don't like to go to that if we don't have to, because that's often the most painful way to kind of fix something, but it is always kind of like the option of last resort. So always a voter verifiable paper ballot that we can go back to. The next one is all of the networks that the county uses to either program their ballots or to collect all the results. Those are secured, they are air-gapped. They are not connected to the internet in any way, shape, or form, and they are not connected to any other county systems. They are a standalone system. The only thing they are doing is the elections. They're not connected to anything else. They're not touched by anything else. They are hardened, so the only applications that are allowed on those systems are the applications that are necessary to run the election. So very secure, those networks locked down. Physical security, electronic security, all that. Certifications. So in order to be a vendor in the state of Wisconsin, we have to go through 2 rounds of certifications. There's the EAC certification at the federal level, which is the United States Election Assistance Commission. And then once we get that, we take that approval and we bring it to the state, Wisconsin Elections Commission, and they also put us through some testing, and then the commission votes to allow us to do business. So we cannot sell a single machine in the state of Wisconsin until we've passed both those rounds of certification. That EAC cert is a very in-depth process. Getting a release certified by the EAC is usually a 6 to 9 month process. The EAC has VSTLs, so Voting System Test Laboratories, that are accredited by NIST to handle this on a technical level. And they go through our systems inside and out and make sure that we are meeting all the federal requirements before it's passed off and approved at that level. So it's very difficult to get into a machine into a hand of a customer here without getting through these 2 rounds. And the last thing is the VVSG, which stands for the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, which my joke here is always it says voluntary, they're not very voluntary. That is the guidelines that the EAC uses to certify their systems to. So we have to meet all the requirements that are in the VVSG and check all the boxes before the EAC gives us approval and gets us certified, so we can go to the state and get certified, so then we can therefore do business with a county or municipality. That's it. Oh, sorry, I got one more slide here. This is the equipment that's in use here in La Crosse County. So on the left is the DS200 tabulator. The middle is the Express Vote. It has the ADA capabilities, but we like to call it a universal voting system. And on the right is the Electionware software that we developed. That was what Jenny uses to do the programming and also to collect all the results on election night. So that's just kind of a little overview of the system in use here in La Crosse.
Any questions? I know it's extraordinarily expensive. companies to go through all of those hoops, going to the federal level. And sometimes the Election Assistance Commission isn't fully staffed, which makes everything messed up for a lot of years, actually. So it costs a lot, and we are getting more and more options for electronic voting equipment. But the reason why we don't have like dozens of options is because it is very expensive for these companies to go through all of that testing and training and education and procedures, and then go through it, and not only at the federal level, but the state level as well. So, any questions about electronic equipment? Yes.
Thank you. I voted with the ADA equipment once just to experience it. Is there a paper ballot associated with those two?
Yeah, it runs off a card instead of a full-size ballot, but then when you make your selections on screen, when the session is over, it prints right on the card what your selections were. So if there's a recount, we're looking back at a piece of paper still.
Marking device only. It marks your. It's a marking device only. It marks your ballot. That ballot then has to be put in the DS200, and then that's where it's tabulated and counted.
We didn't have that technology in the olden days.
Any database can be hacked, and you made a statement that they've never been hacked, but I guess to clarify that, because we need to be suspicious of anything that we hold value, I would say it's never been caught or found out.
Yeah, no, fair points. I mean, I think you're right that any system is can be vulnerable to some type of attack. And so I think that's absolutely right. We do have many assessments that are conducted on our statewide system that both look at, potential vulnerabilities and give us a roadmap to be able to remedy those, and do retroactive assessments where they go in and see, has somebody been able to breach this? Has somebody been in the system and been able to access things? Has somebody tried to even log in that doesn't have, lawful credentials? And so we do those assessments, but you're right, any technological system is something you constantly have to be vigilant about, and it could be vulnerable. But we do, all the assessments that we can to prevent those things and to look back to see if there's been any unlawful activity.
And I would say our government is really big on leading on affecting other elections in other countries, probably one of the biggest. And then to say that the paper ballots are available, I would like to challenge you on that, because I've found that the paper ballots are very difficult to get access or even get copies of them available.
When I said available, I meant in regards to the election officials, municipal clerks, county clerks. Of course, it's available to them. For the public, the public cannot have touch a physical paper ballot. It has to be secure. But another feature of the system is, as you're scanning your ballots, getting tabulated through the DS200, it is actually taking a picture of every ballot that's being scanned on election day. And those images are available post-election to be reviewed by the public of what everything was counted on election day. And for instance, Dane County, he puts his ballot images on his website after every single election. So anybody can log into the Dane County Clerk's website, pull up the images, and somebody at home can do a count and verify it against the results that he's showing.
With AI today, digital images can be easily modified. But I would like to clarify, now are not the elections in Wisconsin supposed to be run by both parties?
Yes, as a matter of fact, county clerks run as partisans, so some county clerks are Republican, some county clerks are Democrat. Their board of canvass is whatever the Democrat is, or whatever the county clerk is, and then one Democrat and one Republican on the county board of canvass to review all the results. In the polling place, all of the poll workers first must be chosen from a list that is received. The municipal clerk receives a list from the county parties that have a list of poll workers that they want to be utilized. Now, if they're not given that list, then they have no one to choose from. So, but the law requires them to be bipartisan. I'm gonna let Nikki expand on that.
Yeah, so we do receive lists from the two major political parties nominating election workers. They are appointed by the governing body to serve as election inspectors for the next election term. If we do not get enough of the affiliated nominees from the parties, we then, as municipal clerks, appoint unaffiliated election workers so that we have an adequate number of poll workers to staff the polling places.
By default, then?
Yes.
And we need to stress that more, that the public needs to be involved. It's amazing to the public that they do not know that they're supposed to be running their elections. But by default, big government has taken it over and made it complicated.
Okay, one more and then we have to move on because we have 2 minutes to our deadline.
I only want to add really to that last statement too. If you are concerned about the credibility of the elections and making accusations about activities that are felonious and so on, you're, as much as anything else, you're talking to this big government that was mentioned, our clerk, the people that are working in the elections, because working the elections themselves, in order to do what has been accused of the hundreds of thousands of votes that were illegal in Wisconsin, you'd have to have a cabal of unaffiliated clerks working together 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to come up with such a thing. It's just foolish. Enough of that silliness. But I did want to say one thing that really didn't get covered tonight, but it's kind of been the source of so much of the misinformation, knowingly or out of ignorance, that the relationship between ERIC, the voting polls, the voting book, and the actual number of registered voters in the state on election night always get conflated because there's too much cross-pollination, at least from a knowledge standpoint. And if I asked a lot of voters and asked them what their thoughts were regarding the number of people that were registered and how many voted, you'd hear things like 40,000 people were registered in Trumpeau County, which has 30,000 people, and then 60,000. I mean, just these crazy numbers. The highest percentages in the state of Wisconsin were in one county where you had 67% of the population was registered, not over 100%, which you keep hearing, and 86% of the registered voters actually voted. They were the highest and much higher than most others. La Crosse County was also very high, but nowhere near more voters than registrations and more registration than voters. It's just a silly kind of a thing. I just thought I'd mention that because I know that's something you battled with two incredible testimonies at the Wisconsin legislature that were just filled with falsity. So
Thank you.
Okay, on we go to post-election. Your comments are well taken. I sat in those meetings where people said really untrue things. So, which is why we're here, actually. So, post-election, city, town, and village, which would be city at this point.
Yeah. All right, so post-election, so this is after the polls close, this is actually, we have moved on to the next day. So this first topic here, securing the delivery of election ballots, media sticks, and records, we've already discussed that a few different times. Everything is secured, securely transported, and there's always a chain of custody for all of that documentation. But then moving on, so post-election, municipal clerks start entering voter participation into WisVote following Election Day. And this is just something that I just want everybody to be very aware of, that this takes time. This is not an automatic process. What staff does in the clerk's office is they go through each poll book ward by ward, and they scan the barcodes and manually enter the voter numbers to record voter participation. And we record both the election day votes and those absentee votes. So they're identified when they're recorded. Was it an election day voter or was it an absentee voter? We're also manually entering the election day registrations. And we're using, of course, the information that comes to us from the paper forms that were completed on election day. So all of that information that is captured on those voter registration forms, that all has to be manually entered into WisVote. Again, recording voter participation and entering those election day registrations, that is priority work, but depending on the turnout, this can take up to a month to complete. We have those very high turnout elections with thousands and thousands of votes cast. It takes time to go through all of those poll books and to give that voter credit. Before we can close out an election, the data entry numbers must be reconciled with those reported totals. An election cannot be closed until there is reconciliated numbers. All voting equipment is then secured in storage, and the supplies are reorganized, and then we start regrouping and prepping for the next election. Post-election audits are also scheduled to further certify election results. So clerks must keep materials organized and secured in the event they are selected for audit. Selection for audits is by random draw of statewide municipal wards or potential recount activities. And then clerks must also be prepared to respond to any record request for the election results or records. Depending on the request, the response time may vary, but any delay is communicated with the requester. So this next slide here is an example of a poll book with voter participation. So you'll see there's a voter number issued there next to a couple names as well as signatures. Line 7 there, 20A, that A designates it was an absentee ballot. So when we are giving voter credit, we will be recording that accordingly. And then again, when I say manually enter, I believe I already said this, but we literally go page by page through every poll book, and we're looking for those voter numbers. And then we're scanning that barcode or entering the voter number that's right above it manually. When we do that in WisVote, it pops up the name so that we can verify we are giving credit to the proper person. Once this is completed, once this voter participation is entered, you can go on to WisVote and you can look at your participation history. So you can log into, not WisVote, you can log into MyVote, search for yourself, and there's an area where you can actually see that voter participation. This occurs after every election. Again, just remember, like a municipality the size of La Crosse, this can take several weeks to accomplish.
So at the county level post-election, our board of camp. What? Yeah, that's my slide. She's telling me it's the wrong slide, but it's not. So our board of canvassers meet and we review everything that happened on election day. Whether the results are modem in or they drive them in, the next day or within the next couple of days, the clerks bring us those sticks and reread them into the software in my office. If what got modem in is different than what I'm reading from the stick, it gets flagged. But nonetheless, when we're going through our canvas, we're looking at the numbers from that tape that was printed at the polls on election night. We're looking at the zero tape. Were they zeroed? Do I have the signatures of the poll workers confirming it was zero? And now I have the totals of everything that happened on election day. And that's what we're comparing. We're looking at how many ballots were cast, how many voters were in the poll book. Those should match. If they don't, we want to figure out why. A lot of times it's kind of what Nikki said earlier. A number was used twice or a number was forgotten to be put in one poll book over the other. We have processes in place where we can go find that. We're doing reports from the media sticks. And then we're looking for anything out of normal that happened that doesn't match, and we're going to review and we want answers as to why so everything can reconcile. We then certify the results, If they're state contests, we send them to WIC. If there's just county contests, we certify them, we post them on our website. And then we're preparing for a recount. If there's a close contest on election night, not only are we looking at results, but I'm looking at numbers and how close they are, and are they within 1%? Are they within 0.25%? Are we having a recount? That timeline is extremely tight. So if we think there's going to be a recount or if someone's going to get a free recount, we have to start preparing for that right away. As Nikki mentioned, we also do the audits. We usually help the municipal clerks with their audits. In November of 22, 9 reporting units were audited. When we do the audit, the ballots are counted by hand by 2 different people. And when they count them, we're not looking for voter intent like poll workers do on election night. We're looking at that ballot and how the machine is going to count it. Because what we're doing at an audit, we want to make sure that ballot is counted correctly and the machine is counting it correctly. So we're going to hand count those ballots on how the machine would count it, and that number should match what was on the tape that printed off on election night. We're very happy to report any audits we've ever had. There's never been any discrepancies or numbers not matching. And then, like Nikki, we're responding to open records requests. And if we haven't at this point, we've already start looking at the next election and probably starting to code it and prepare the ballots. Oh, you switched, sorry. This is just a sample of what the certification looks like that we send to the state and what we file on our website and in our Canvas book. It's just the totals, the write-ins, which is what we call scatterings, and there's the signatures for the 3 board of canvassers certifying that we went through everything and that everything matched up, or this is what the final results really are.
Great. And at the state, no, we're not taking a nap at this point. We're doing a couple of things too. So we also have to certify results at the state level. So the chairperson of our commission has a public meeting where they go through and they look at all of the Canvas statements that have been submitted to us by the counties. And we have a process where we can make sure that, let's say we got a statement from the city of La Crosse, and it reported that they had more votes cast than they had registered voters. That would be a hard stop. We'd say, no way, we can't certify this election. That number doesn't make any sense. And we'd have to send it back down the chain, and they'd have to reconvene to figure out what happened. Did they report a wrong number? Did somebody make a mistake? What happened? And so the state level is where we double check all of that on a more macro level. And if we identify a problem, we have to send it back down for certification. We also collect the data from the locals, and we do a process called reconciliation. So that's where our system is running a program and all the data entered by the clerks. And if it sees anomalies, if it sees things like, you've got more absentee ballots that were issued than you have absentee ballot requests or something like that, it's going to kick it back to them and say, you've got to take a look at this. These numbers do not line up. And so that's a big part of what we do after Election Day in the statewide voter registration system. Like we talked about, reports to the legislature about instances of voter fraud. So as those are caught before Election Day, on Election Day, after Election Day, all those instances are reported to the legislature. They're usually, fewer than 50 in any given election of those types of illegal activities. We also send postcards to voters who have registered to vote on Election Day. So if you register to vote at the polls on Election Day, that information is entered then into the statewide system. We then send a postcard to that voter's address. It's another check to make sure they really actually live there. If that postcard bounces back to the clerk can investigate that and can refer those people then to their district attorney if they believe that somebody didn't lawfully register to vote. We provide a lot of federal reports. So the EVES is a report that is produced by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. It's actually really interesting because it compares data points across the whole country. So we're able to kind of show, what are the trends? How many people voted absentee? How many people voted in any given state? So we compile all that data from our 1,850 municipalities, and we send that to the federal government as well. And I already talked about this, yeah.
Oh my gosh, we're running over. If you have no questions, that's great. But if you have a question, Lee is ready, willing, and able to give you the microphone.
I don't have a question, I have a comment. Probably the election in 2020 was the most scrutinized election in the history of Wisconsin. We have a party that was questioning everything and was claiming fraud. The election results that you folks supplied withstood an audit, it withstood recounts, it withstood an investigation that cost $1 million of the taxpayers' money. The party that was screaming the loudest about election fraud is the same party that created a fake slate of electors whose goal was to steal the presidential election. My comment is, if there's a party claiming one thing and the election people are claiming another thing, I'm believing you guys.
Thank you.
I've worked both as a poll observer and a poll worker. And what I realize is that the politicians have made your job as administrators extremely arduous, and you're commended to be for your hard work. And I might sound belligerent, but I'm only asking the questions that people that aren't here, that I run into, and I believe that the elections are fair and honest, except for the circumstances that you don't know, like the fact that you're able to order an absentee ballot from someone else. And unless someone is honest and comes forward and says, I did this, you don't know what the system is allowing to happen.
Well, I think in part, if I voted for my daughter and she showed up to vote, I would be prosecuted for fraud. So there is a check that way if you try to vote for somebody who's also trying to cast a ballot. We are a nonpartisan, bipartisan organization. And election denialism isn't just a Republican issue. It's a Democrat issue as well. There were millions of dollars spent from 2016 through 2020 to prove Russian collusion with a legitimate elected president. And so we try to be fair and just on both sides, and it is important for Democrats and Republicans to do the same because we're Americans first. The division in this country is making our adversaries gleeful. The division among race and ethnicity, Democrats and Republicans, is making our adversaries gleeful because we're ready to point the fingers at the people that need to correct themselves. I was reading Matthew 7, and that talks about judging others, and that we will take the speck out of your eye and leave the log in our own. So if you come here with an attitude about you're a Democrat or you're a Republican first, instead of you're an American first, we're in the wrong room. We're Americans trying to make our system fair and equitable for both the left and the right, the Democrat, the Republican, and the independent, who generally decides the statewide and nationwide elections in the first place. So the independents are looking at us like we're all nuts. So just bear in mind that we are Americans. We care about this republic that we so dearly love, that hopefully we celebrate the 250th anniversary and we don't crumble before then. So God bless you all. Have a wonderful day. Dear Wisconsinites and Americans. Oh, if anyone wants to stay for the usability study on the absentee voter certificates envelopes, which I'm sure is going to be really exhilarating for you, I really want you to give input to Megan Wolf on those because I think they're pretty good. It's one of the confusing things about the last certificate where the witness forgot to sign or the elector forgot to sign and all of that is because it wasn't all that user friendly. So if you'd like to stay can give Megan input, please feel free to do.
It's in,
It's in the room behind here.
It's in the room behind here.
yeah, my staff came with me and they're in the room back there and they'll just ask you some questions and you can help make the new certificate envelope better and more usable. So we'd love to have your feedback.
If you would like the slides, please email me, Kathy@keepourrepublic.com, and I can email the slides. I can send that to you via email. So thank you for being here.